Welcome to the third part of Crime and Punishment, written by Fyodor Dostoevsky. To go wrong in one's own way is better than to go right in someone else's. In the first case, you are a man. In the second, you are no better than a bird. Truth won't escape you, but life can be cramped. Razumihin. So let's continue from where I left off in the previous part. After getting back to consciousness, shortly after he had fainted, Raskolnikov then made his opinion known to his mother and sister that he was against the marriage between his sister Dunya and her would-be fiancé Pyotr Petrovich Luzin. And if his sister Dunya was to go on with the marriage, then Raskolnikov would disown her, as only he, Raskolnikov, could be a scoundrel in their family. Pulcheria Alexandrovna, Raskolnikov's mother, and Avdotia Romanovna, whom is also Dunya, Raskolnikov's sister, then returned to their lodging at Bakaliev's house, leaving Raskolnikov to rest, as he was very much irritable. They returned to Raskolnikov's garret the following day, accompanied with Razumin, Raskolnikov's friend. You see, this very day, early in the morning, the ladies, Pulcheria Alexandrovna, Raskolnikov's mother, and Avdotia Romanovna, Raskolnikov's sister, who also goes by Dunya, had received a note from Dunya's fiancé, Pyotr Petrovich Luzin, in reply to the ladies' letter announcing their arrival at Petersburg. Pyotr Petrovich had initially promised to meet the ladies at the station when they arrived at Petersburg, but instead, Pyotr Petrovich had sent a servant to bring the ladies to the address of where he had rented a lodge for them. Pyotr Petrovich had then sent a message that he would be at Bakaliev's house that morning, which was the following day after they had arrived, the day which now the ladies had come to see Raskolnikov again after their first meeting. And Bakaliev's house was the place at which the ladies were lodged. But Pyotr Petrovich didn't also show up that morning because, as he claimed in his note, he had an important business in the Senate that he had to attend to, and he also did not want to intrude on the family circle while the ladies were meeting with Raskolnikov. Pyotr Petrovich stated in his note to the ladies that he was going to visit and pay his respect at their lodge at Bakaliev's house not later than around 8 o'clock precisely in the evening on the morrow. And then Pyotr Petrovich went on to request that Raskolnikov should not be present at this meeting, as Raskolnikov had offered Pyotr Petrovich a gross and unprecedented affront on the occasion of his visit to Raskolnikov the day before. And moreover, Pyotr Petrovich sought an explanation on the event to which he witnessed with his own eyes of Raskolnikov giving to the daughter of a drunken man who was run over and had since died the sum of 25 rubles on the pretext of a funeral, which gravely surprised Pyotr Petrovich, as he knew the pains to which Pulcheria Alexandrovna had went through to raise that sum of money, which she had then sent to her son Raskolnikov. Pyotr Petrovich then stated that if, in spite of his request, that he was to meet Raskolnikov at the period of which he was to visit and pay his respect to the women at their lodge at Bakaliev's house, then he would be compelled to withdraw immediately, and the ladies would have only themselves to blame. The note of Pyotr Petrovich Luzin was shown to Raskolnikov by the ladies on their second visit to him at the garret, to which Raskolnikov then made it known to his sister Dunya that he had become okay with her decision to marry Pyotr Petrovich, if that was truly what she wanted. But to his perception, Raskolnikov's perception, Pyotr Petrovich had no respect or esteem for Dunya, his sister, as Pyotr Petrovich had alluded in the note that he would abandon the ladies if Raskolnikov were to be present at their meeting in the evening on the morrow. Although it was at Pyotr Petrovich's request that the ladies had come to Petersburg, Dunya, in protest to her brother's notion, then positively affirmed that Pyotr Petrovich held her in high esteem and respect. And to prove that, she invited Raskolnikov to the meeting with Petrovich, to which Raskolnikov agreed to attend in company with Razumihin. Pulchera Alexandrovna and Avdotya Romanovna, that is Dunya, thus made their exit from Raskolnikov's garret, going back to their lodging at Bakaleyev's house. Raskolnikov, after, proceeded to ask Razumihin about Porfiry Petrovich, whom was managing the case of the murder of the old pawnbroker, Alyona Ivanovna. Porfiry Petrovich was the person examining Alyona Ivanovna's customers who had pledges with her at the point leading up to the old pawnbroker's murder. Raskolnikov desired for Razumihin to take him to the place of Porfiry Petrovich, whom was a relation to Razumihin, on the rules that he, Raskolnikov, had pawned his father's old watch and the rings given to him by his sister Dunya earlier at their initial pattern 3 years ago, and subsequently to ascertain how he could reacquire those items. Raskolnikov and Razumihin got to the residence of Porfiry Petrovich, the lead investigator in the murder case of Alyona Ivanovna. He was a lawyer and also at the present was in the company of Zametov, the head clerk at the police station to which Raskolnikov had spoken to the previous day at the Palais de Cristal, the restaurant. Raskolnikov then introduced himself and stated his business in regards towards how he could repossess the items which he had pledged to Alyona Ivanovna, the old pawnbroker, before her death. Porfiry Petrovich then informed Raskolnikov that he had to report this occurrence to the police, that having learnt of the incident, the murder, that he, Raskolnikov, begs to inform the lawyer in charge of the case that such and such things belongs to him, and that he, Raskolnikov, desires to redeem them. Porfiry Petrovich then revealed to Raskolnikov that he had been expecting Raskolnikov to come and see him for a while. That Raskolnikov's things, the ring and the watch, were wrapped up together, and on the paper was Raskolnikov's name, written legibly in pencil, together with the dates at which Raskolnikov had left the items with the old pawnbroker, Alyona Ivanovna. That all who had pledges with the old pawnbroker had come forward and subsequently been examined, except for Raskolnikov. Porfiry Petrovich then asked Raskolnikov about an article he had read 2 months ago, which was written by Raskolnikov 6 months ago when Raskolnikov left the university. The article was on the topic, the psychology of a criminal before and after the crime. And in the article, Raskolnikov had maintained that the perpetration of a crime is always accompanied by illness. But what struck out peculiarly to us Porfiry Petrovich, the lead investigator, was that in this article, Raskolnikov had suggested or alluded towards the notion that there are certain persons who can, that is, not precisely are able to, but have a perfect right to commit breaches of morality and crimes, and that the law is not for these individuals. Raskolnikov argued that all men are divided into ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary men have to live in submission, have no right to transgress the law because they are ordinary, but extraordinary men have a right to commit any crime and to transgress the law in any way because they are extraordinary. An extraordinary man has a right, that is, not an official right, but an inner right, to decide in his own conscience to overstep certain obstacles, and only in case it is essential for the practical fulfillment of his idea, which sometimes or perhaps may be of benefit to the whole of humanity. Raskolnikov maintained that if the discoveries of Kepler and Newton could not have been made known except by sacrificing the lives of one, a dozen, 100, or more men, Newton would have had the right, would indeed have been in duty bound to eliminate the dozen or the 100 men for the sake of making his discoveries known to the whole of humanity. That legislators and leaders of men were all without exception criminals, from the very fact that in making a new law, they transgressed the ancient one, handed down from their ancestors and held sacred by the people. That all great men, or even men a little out of the common, that is to say, capable of giving some new word, must from their very nature be criminals. Otherwise, it would be hard for these extraordinary men to get out of the common rut and to remain in the common rut is what these extraordinary men cannot submit to. From their very nature, and to Raskolnikov's mind, they ought not, indeed, to submit to it. The crimes of these extraordinary men are, of course, relative and varied. For the most part, they seek in very varied ways the destruction of the present for the sake of the better. But if such a one is forced for the sake of his idea to step over a corpse or wade through blood, he can find within himself, in his conscience, the sanction for wading through blood. The first category of ordinary men is always the man of the present. The second category of extraordinary men is of the future. The first preserve the world and people it. The second move the world and lead it to its goal. But in terms of retrograde individuals, degenerate persons that consider themselves to be an extraordinary man and then goes on in an immoral way to remove obstacles so as to achieve their ends, society then is well protected by prisons, banishments, criminal investigators, penal servitude, and so on, in order to go on and bring the perpetrator of whatever crime to justice. And also from the point of humanity and conscience, these extraordinary men would suffer greatly within as a result of the dastardly acts they committed to achieve their goal, as pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large consciousness and a deep heart. The really great men must, in the thoughts of Raskolnikov, have great sadness on it. After Raskolnikov then gave his explanation of his theories and postulations, he was then invited by the lead investigator, Porfiry Petrovich, to come to the police station on the morrow at about 11 o'clock for certain, so as to settle the business of the items Raskolnikov had pledged with the old pawnbroker, Aliona Ivanovna, and as one of the last persons to have interacted with the murdered woman, to perhaps tell the authorities something that may aid towards the investigation. After leaving the residence of Porfiry Petrovich, Raskolnikov and Razumihin then made their way to Bakaleyev's house, rather, to meet with the ladies Pulchera Alexandrovna and Avdotia Romanovna for dinner. But on reaching the house, Raskolnikov excused himself and left Razumihin to attend to the ladies, while he then went back to his garret. On coming out of his lodge to join Razumihin, whom was with the ladies at Bakaleyev's house, Raskolnikov's attention was drawn to the porter of his building, whom was pointing him out, identifying Raskolnikov to a stranger whom had come to ask the porter if a student lived at the house, and just coincidentally Raskolnikov had appeared. Raskolnikov ran after the stranger and at once caught sight of the stranger walking along the other side of the street. Raskolnikov then overtook the stranger, but for some time walked behind him. At last, moving on to a level with the stranger, Raskolnikov looked at his face. The man noticed Raskolnikov at once, looked at him quickly, but dropped his eyes again, and so they walked for a minute, side by side, without uttering a word. "You were inquiring for me, of the porter," Raskolnikov said at last, but in a curiously quiet voice. The man made no answer. He didn't even look at Raskolnikov. Again, they were both silent. "Why do you come and ask for me, and say nothing? What's the meaning of it?" The man raised his eyes this time and turned a gloomy, sinister look at Raskolnikov. "Murderer," he said suddenly, in a quiet but clear and distinct voice. Raskolnikov went on walking beside the stranger. His legs felt suddenly weak. A cold shiver ran down his spine, and his heart seemed to stand still for a moment. Then suddenly began throbbing as though it were set free. So they walked for about 100 paces, side by side, in silence. The man did not look at Raskolnikov. "What do you mean? Who is a murderer?" muttered Raskolnikov, hardly audibly. "You are a murderer," the man answered, still more articulately and emphatically, with a smile of triumphant hatred. And again he looked straight into Raskolnikov's pale face and stricken eyes. They had just reached the crossroads. The man turned to the left without looking behind him. Raskolnikov remained standing, gazing after the stranger. He saw the stranger turn around 50 paces away and look back at him, still standing there. Raskolnikov could not see clearly, but he fancied that the stranger was again smiling, the same smile of cold hatred and triumph. With slow, faltering steps, with shaking knees, Raskolnikov made his way back to his little garret, feeling chilled all over. He took off his cap and put it on the table. and for 10 minutes he stood without moving. Then he sank, exhausted, on the sofa, and, with a weak moan of pain, he stretched himself on it. So he lay for half an hour. Raskolnikov then heard the hurried footsteps of Razumihin. He closed his eyes and pretended to be asleep. Razumihin opened the door and stood for some time in the doorway, as though hesitating. Then he stopped. He stepped softly into the room and went cautiously to the sofa. Raskolnikov heard Nastasia, the servant, whisper, "Don't disturb him. Let him sleep. He can have his dinner later." "Quite so," answered Razumihin. Both withdrew carefully and closed the door. Another half hour passed. Raskolnikov opened his eyes, turned on his back again, clasping his hands behind his head. Who is he? Who is that man who sprang out of the earth? Where was he? What did he see? Has he seen it all? That's clear. Where was he then? And from where did he see? Why has he only now sprung out of the earth? And how could he see? Is it possible? Continued Raskolnikov, turning cold, shivering. At moments, Raskolnikov felt he was raving. He sank into a state of feverish excitement. The old woman is of no consequence, he thought hotly and incoherently. The old woman was a mistake, perhaps, but she is not what matters. The old woman was only an illness. I was in a hurry to overstep. I didn't kill a human being, but a principle. I killed the principle, but I didn't overstep. I stopped on this side. I was only capable of killing, and it seems I wasn't even capable of that principle. Of all the lies I picked out, the most useless one, and proposed to take from her only as much as I needed for the first step, no more nor less. So the rest would have gone to a monastery, according to her will. And what shows that I am utterly a louse is that I am perhaps viler and more loathsome than the louse I killed, and I felt beforehand that I should tell myself so after killing her. Can anything be compared with the horror of that, the vulgarity, the abjectness? His hair was soaked with sweat, his quivering lips were parched, his eyes were fixed on the ceiling. Mother, sister, how I loved them. Why do I hate them now? Yes, I hate them. I feel a physical hatred for them. I can't bear them near me. I went up to my mother and kissed her, I remember, to embrace her and think if she only knew. Shall I tell her then? That's just what I meant to. She must be the same as I am. Ah, how I hate the old woman now. I feel I should kill her again if she came to life. Poor Lizaveta. Why did she come in? It's strange though. Why is it I scarcely ever think of her, as though I hadn't killed her? Lizaveta. Raskolnikov then lost consciousness. Raskolnikov then woke up after having a vivid dream which greatly disturbed him. And then, not long after, his door was flung open, and a man whom Raskolnikov had never seen stood in the doorway, watching Raskolnikov intently. Raskolnikov had hardly opened his eyes, and he instantly closed them again. He laid on his back without stirring. Is this still a dream? Raskolnikov wondered, and again raised his eyelids, hardly perceptibly. The stranger was standing in the same place, still watching Raskolnikov. The stranger stepped cautiously into the room, carefully closing the door after him, went up to the table, paused a moment, still keeping his eyes on Raskolnikov, and noiselessly seated himself on the chair by the sofa. He put his hat on the floor beside him and leaned his hands on his cane and his chin on his hands. It was evident that he was prepared to wait indefinitely, as far as Raskolnikov could make out from his stolen glasses. The stranger was a man no longer young, stout, with a full, fair, almost whitish beard. 10 minutes passed. It was still light, but beginning to get dusk. There was complete stillness in the room. Not a sound came from the stairs. Only a big fly buzzed and fluttered against the window pane. It was unbearable at last. Raskolnikov suddenly got up and sat on the sofa. Come, tell me what you want. I knew you were not asleep, but only pretending, the stranger answered oddly, laughing calmly. Arkady Ivanovich Svridrigailov. Allow me to introduce myself. A new moon teaches gradualness and deliberation, and how one gives birth to oneself slowly. Patience with small details makes perfect work, like the universe. Rumi.